June 17, 1924, Archibald Thompson Hall was born in Ibrox Road in Glasgow, Scotland. His childhood was fragmented and he was socially excluded in his youth. As he struggled to make and maintain friendships, he would frequently not attend school and would spend his free time watching variety shows. Struck by the praise and adulation the performers would receive, he was driven by a desire to elevate himself out of his working-class background and disjointed home life. While he was still in his teens, he began having run-ins with the law and, according to reports, was on the police's radar from the age of just 15 years old. Was also bisexual, and his marriage had fallen apart soon after it had started. In the late 1940s, Hall left Scotland and traveled south to England. London was still under rationing, as was the rest of the country, and the rebuilding of the city wouldn't fully get underway until the 1950s. Hall traveled to Soho and soon became a firm fixture in the nightclubs. During that time, not only was homosexuality illegal, but members of the LGBTQ+ community were treated appallingly by both police and society in general. The London club scene, however, was more open. During that time, various gangs controlled different parts of the city, and this gave Hall an insight into London's criminal underworld, a life he was desperate to be a part of. His love of performing made him a consummate conman, and he soon began committing theft. Between 1945 and 1977, Hall had spent more time inside prison than out of it. Alongside his love of variety shows, cinema was another fixation for Hall. Upon his release from prison, he began using the name Roy Fontaine, named after legendary actress Joan Fontaine after he saw her in Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. He would confidently pose as an aristocrat or a wealthy American and quickly perfected his skills as a conman and thief. He would introduce himself as Dr. Roy Fontaine to gain people's trust. And according to one report, he was jailed in the 1970s for selling secret papers to the Russians. In a letter, Hall explained that this was a miscarriage of justice and that he was an innocent man. On one occasion, he stole the invitation meant for his employer and impersonated him at a party at Holyrood House in Edinburgh. As he began to move up the social circles, he got a job as a butler in Dumfries, Scotland, working for Lady Margaret Hudson. Lady Hudson was the widow of Sir Austin Hudson, a former Conservative Member of Parliament. Hall made a good impression with those in the community, and he was described as polite and incredibly well-mannered. In 1977, one of Hall's former lovers arrived in Dumfries, throwing Hall's life into chaos. David Wright had shared a cell with Archibald Hall when they were both serving time in Hall prison together. The pair had had a sexual relationship, and Wright's presence in Dumfries was a major threat to Hall. David Wright was given a job as a gamekeeper and began doing odd jobs throughout the house. He knew too much about Hall and his past and threatened to reveal this to Lady Hudson. Wright also began to steal from the house, leaving Hall enraged. Wright stole some of the antique silver in a ring, but Archibald Hall told him he needed to return it, and this quickly sparked an explosive row. As the argument escalated, David attempted to shoot Archibald, but missed. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Hall plied Wright with alcohol before the pair slept together. Although the argument appeared to be over, Hall had made his mind up. David Wright had to die. The next morning, they decided to go rabbit hunting on the grounds. Before they left, Hall ensured that Wright's gun was not loaded. David Wright remarked what a lovely day it was. Hall, ever the performer, allegedly replied, "Lovely day. Shame this is the last day you will see." He then pulled his gun up and shot David Wright in the head. Archibald Hall had gone from a thief and conman to a cold-blooded killer. He buried Wright next to the river that ran through the grounds. When he would take Lady Hudson's dog for a walk, each time he would put more stones on where he had buried the body, so that the dog couldn't smell it. Hall told Lady Hudson that Wright had left suddenly due to being offered a job elsewhere. Soon after, Hall headed back to London. Lady Hudson was none the wiser about the sinister goings-on and gave him a glowing reference to help him secure his next job. In October 1977, he got a job as a butler for Walter and Dorothy Scott Elliott. Walter Scott Elliott was 82 years old and had served as the Labour MP for Accrington between 1945 and 1950. He was from an aristocratic Scottish background, and his wife Dorothy was also incredibly wealthy. The pair lived at 200 Sloane Street in the prominent and affluent area of Knightsbridge, West London. Like Lady Hudson, the Scott Elliots found him to be affable, polite, and developed a real fondness for him. Being part of their household gave Archibald Hall the opportunity to case nearby properties and seamlessly move about in their social circles. He intended to rob his elderly wealthy employers, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He made contact with his former lover, an Irish woman named Mary Coggle, and asked if she knew anyone that could help him pull it off. She arranged a meeting, and in November 1977 at a pub in King's Cross, she introduced 53-year-old Archibald Hall to 39-year-old Michael Kiddo. Like Archibald Hall, Michael Kiddo had had an unstable childhood, and he also spent time in the foster care system. After moving around a lot, he ended up in the armed forces, but he was dishonorably discharged after committing a robbery. Kiddo had had 2 failed marriages and a daughter, and with no stable address, he moved around the country often. He would take on odd jobs where he could find them in an attempt to support himself. He had many run-ins with the law and was frequently in front of judges for committing petty offenses. Despite his long rap sheet, this wasn't the experienced accomplice that Archibald Hall had been looking for. But for Kiddo, this was the perfect opportunity to make some big money. Money that was unprecedented for him. When they met, Kiddo was on the run after robbing the pub he had worked at as a barman. The crimes that was talking about were a huge step up from the petty offenses that Kiddo had committed thus far. The dynamic between the pair was instant. Hall was in charge, and Kiddo did what he was told to do. Kiddo greatly admired Hall and was hugely flattered that he had been asked to help him in his criminal endeavors. After committing several robberies in the local area, they set about devising a plan to rob Walter and Dorothy Scott Elliott. They would steal little and often in the hopes that the vulnerable elderly couple wouldn't realize. This plan, however, quickly and rather spectacularly fell apart. In December 1977, less than a month after they had first met, Dorothy Scott Elliott walked in on Hall and Kiddo discussing their plans and what could be stolen from the home. Kiddo had no right to be in the house, and it appeared that their crimes were about to come to an abrupt end. In reality, they were about to escalate in the most appalling way imaginable. They both immediately decided that she had to be killed. Dorothy Scott Elliott was smothered to death while her beloved husband Walter was asleep upstairs. In murdering Dorothy, they had killed a popular socialite in the busy UK capital, someone whose disappearance would not go unnoticed. They knew they had to leave and leave quickly. They moved her body to the boot of their car before drugging Walter and driving to Scotland. So as not to draw attention to themselves, Mary Coggle dressed up as the deceased Dorothy Scott Elliott. According to the Daily Record, they convinced the confused and semi-conscious Walter to allow them to drive him to various banks, withdrawing huge sums of money. After traveling 400 miles, they reached Braco in Perthshire. After they pulled into a quiet road, they removed the body of Dorothy Scott Elliott and buried her. Walter was still under the influence of the drugs they had given him, and after burying Dorothy, they carried on driving. They took him to an isolated spot in Inverness. He was taken out of the car and strangled with a scarf. Believing he was dead, and Kiddo walked back to the car, but they began to hear a groaning sound coming from where they had left Walter's body. He was still alive. According to Hall, he sent Kiddo back with a shovel and told him to finish the job. Walter Scott Elliott was then beaten to death. 3 people were now dead, and the crime spree showed no signs of stopping. But the trio soon ran into problems. Mary Coggle insisted on continuing to wear Dorothy's distinctive fur coat, as well as her jewelry, which started to bring them unwanted attention. Desperate to escape, they headed to Cumbria and arrived in the small village of Newton Arlosh. They began to rent a cottage nearby, and Kiddo and Hall became regulars at the local pub while they attempted to lie low. Unbeknownst to the residents of the sleepy English village, 2 brutal murderers and their accomplice were now living in their midst. Hall told local residents that he was an antique dealer, another part of the web of lies he was spinning. During their time at the cottage, they had made several trips back to where the Scott Elliots had lived to sell off more of their antiques. They told the Scott Elliots caretaker that the couple had gone abroad unexpectedly. A few weeks later, on Christmas Day in 1977, a shepherd was walking down by the stream that ran past the village. It was here that he made a horrific discovery. He found the body of a woman lying in the water. She had suffered appalling head injuries and had seemingly died a very violent death. It soon became clear who it was. It was Mary Coggle. As the investigation into her murder got underway, a few weeks later in January 1978, Hall contacted the mother of an old associate and asked if he and Kiddo could stay for the night. They headed off to East Lothian, but due to a snowstorm, they had to stop mid-journey. On the night of the 16th of January, they arrived in North Berwick and booked a room at the Blenheim House Hotel. Norman Wright, who was the owner of the hotel at the time, said there was something about the pair he immediately didn't like. Listening to his instincts, he called the police as he thought they had fled from another hotel and not paid the bill, and he was worried they might do the same to him. The police arrived and checked the tax disc on the car. The tax disc didn't match the number plate. When the police said they wanted to speak to Kiddo and Hall, Norman Wright said they were extremely calm and willing to talk to the officers. It was reported in the Watford Observer that Hall had had the number plate changed as the original one had 999 on it, the UK emergency code, which Hall didn't appreciate. The detectives then took them down to the station to answer questions. Officers described them as calm and collected, with Kiddo being quiet and Hall doing all the talking. Hall was also confident in answering the officers' questions. During their interviews, he made regular trips to the bathroom, and on one of those trips, he escaped out the window and fled the station. Officers from CID came to remove the car, and upon seizing it, the duty inspector made a terrifying discovery. In the boot of the car was the body of a naked man. This had gone from a petty driving offense to a major murder investigation, but one of their killers had just escaped. Archibald's flashy style ultimately caught up with him. He was immediately recognizable as he was smartly dressed, with a red and white polka dot handkerchief in his breast pocket. And later that night, he was caught as part of a road check in nearby Wallingford. Finally, Archibald Hall was back in custody. When he was back at the station, he allegedly swallowed pills that he had concealed and subsequently collapsed. He was taken to hospital and later discharged back into the custody of officers. He was initially arrested for handling stolen items, giving police more time to build a case against him for murder. It wasn't long before he started talking, and officers could not believe what they were hearing. In the case of Dorothy Scott Elliott, both men began to blame each other. But what had happened to the woman who had brought Hall and Kiddo together? What had happened to Mary Coggle? In his statement, Hall had said that an argument had broken out about her refusal to part with Dorothy's fur coat and jewelry. Coggle was drawing and wanted attention to them, while Hall was desperate for them to fly under the radar. He explained that during an argument near the river, she had fallen off the bridge, cracked her head open, and died. But scientific analysis said otherwise. Officers believed that what had actually happened was far more deliberate. They believed that the argument had begun at the cottage they were staying in, and that Mary Coggle had been beaten with a fire poker and then suffocated with a plastic bag. At the cottage, police also found blood stains and fingerprints that matched Mary Coggle. They also found linen that had the crest of the Scott Elliots on it. The men then drove her body to the river and threw it over the bridge. Then came another question. Who was the man in the boot of their car and why had he been murdered? The final victim was not a stranger to them. He was Archibald's half-brother, Donald. It is believed that after Mary had been murdered and before they fled to Scotland, they arrived back at their cottage and found Donald waiting for them. Donald was a pedophile who had just been released from prison. Despite being related, the pair had an extremely fraught relationship, and there was no love lost between the two of them. They told Donald that he could be part of their next job, which would include tying up their victims. Donald was persuaded to let them practice on him. Once he was restrained and unable to move, Hall used chloroform to render him immobile. Archibald Hall then drowned Donald in the bathtub. On the 16th of January 1978, the pair put Donald's body in the boot of their car and headed north toward Scotland. But why had he murdered his brother? According to Archibald's lawyer, the one person he cared about was his daughter Caroline. As his brother was a pedophile, his lawyer said he likely had killed him to protect her, although this has been called into question. He didn't regularly see his daughter, and she was barely mentioned in his later written autobiography. In his confession, he remarked how surprised he had been with Walter Scott Elliott's strength. During their interviews, it also became clear that Kiddo had, ironically, had a very lucky escape in being arrested. Hall had no loyalty to him and saw him as dispensable. Kiddo was likely going to be the next victim, as Archibald had planned to murder him too. When talking about why he had committed his appalling crimes, Hall's defense was staggering. He blamed Michael Kiddo for starting him off again on a career of crime and said it was all his fault. He also made a second attempt to take his own life. While in hospital, he finally confessed to officers about his very first murder. He went on to explain how he had brutally killed David Wright. Archibald Hall eventually confessed to the murders and led the police to the bodies of his victims. As the murders had taken place in both Scotland and England, trials had to be held in both countries. The case for the murders committed in Scotland went to the High Court in Edinburgh on Kiddo's 40th birthday. The confident and performative Hall was unusually silent. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Uncharacteristically, Kiddo turned to the press bench and said, "Oh well, life begins at 40. Kiddo was convicted of the murders of Mary Coggle and Walter Scott Elliott and the manslaughter of Dorothy Scott Elliott and Donald Hall. Hall was convicted at courts in both London and Edinburgh of 4 murders. The murder of Dorothy Scott Elliott was ordered to lie on file, meaning that a judge acknowledged there was enough evidence to make a case, but it wasn't in the public interest to proceed, normally because the accused has acknowledged more serious offenses. In the summer of 1978, Hall was given 2 life sentences for the murder of Wright and Walter Scott Elliott at the High Court in Edinburgh. He was later given 2 more life sentences for the murders of Coggle and Donald Hall at the Old Bailey. In 1999, Hall wrote an autobiography called A Perfect Gentleman detailing his life and crimes. He stated in the book, "There is a side of me when aroused that is cold and completely heartless." He went on to cooperate in writing several other books too, including To Kill and Kill Again, The Chilling True Confessions of a Serial Killer, and The Wicked Mr. Hall. A film about his life was also due to be released, with acclaimed actor Malcolm McDowell starring as the titular monster butler, but the film was cancelled due to lack of funding. While in prison, Hall went on hunger strike several times and spoke of not wanting to grow old in his cell. On September 16, 2002, while serving his sentence, Archibald Hall died at HMP Kingston. A spokesman for the coroner's office said that Hall had died of natural causes. He was 78 years old. At the time of his death, he was the oldest prisoner serving a whole life sentence. Kiddo was eventually released, and his whereabouts are unknown to the public. The crimes of Archibald Hall were shocking, calculated, and cruel. 5 people lost their lives due to greed and ruthlessness, and many more fell victim to the consummate conman's lies. The chance checking of the tax disc had brought to an end an extraordinary chain of events that had left a trail of chaos and destruction. If they hadn't have been stopped, one can only speculate about how many more may have fallen. Gladys Stella Kidd was a grandmother living in Moorhead, a small town in Rowan County, Kentucky. Gladys had been married for 49 years, but her husband Stella passed away in 1983. She was an active member of her church. In 1990, Gladys sold the remaining half of her farm. She had sold the first half of it back in 1988. In the August, she went to the People's First Bank to cash a $56,000 check she had received from the sale. Despite warnings from the bank staff, she insisted on taking the full amount in cash. After August 6, 1990, Gladys Stella Kidd was never seen again. The only things found to be missing from Miss Kidd's home were the cash, a filing cabinet, and some clothes. She parked her car in town and left it there with the keys inside. 17 days after Miss Kidd was last seen, a letter postmarked in Lexington, Kentucky arrived at her son's home. The letter instructed her family not to look for her and said that she would leave again if they found her and forced her to return home. While this letter seems to indicate that Miss Kidd disappeared voluntarily, it has not been determined that she wrote it willingly. Miss Kidd's family believes that she was the victim of foul play and that she had been forced by her killer to write the letter. The note was her killer's way of preventing an investigation into her disappearance and protecting himself from being caught. The family's concern stemmed largely from a mysterious boyfriend who had been a part of Miss Kidd's life for the last few years prior to her disappearance. A few years after her husband's passing, Miss Kidd began corresponding on the phone and going on secret dates with a man that she refused to identify to anyone in her life. When calling Miss Kidd at home, this man would hang up the phone if anyone besides her picked up. Despite multiple family members pressing her for details on this man, Miss Kidd would always refuse to reveal his identity. All she would ever say was that he was a man known to the family and that they would be surprised when they did find out who he was. The secrecy around this relationship caused many people close to Miss Kidd to warn her to end it. According to a letter to the editor in the Norhead News, written by Miss Kidd's granddaughter, Sandra Nathanson, her family believed this man to be a predator. She further implied that this boyfriend was the reason that the proceeds Miss Kidd earned from selling the first half of a family farm in 1988 mysteriously vanished. If this boyfriend had been using Miss Kidd for money, he would have had no use for her after receiving the proceeds from the sale of the second half of their family farm. Having taken all of Miss Kidd's assets, this individual could have seen her as a liability once she realized her boyfriend's interest in her was purely financial. Miss Kidd would no longer be willing to conceal his identity. She therefore may have fallen victim to foul play to protect both her boyfriend's ill-gotten financial gains and his reputation in the community. The family's belief that Miss Kidd met with foul play is supported by the fact that after she disappeared, she stopped collecting her social security checks and her driver's license was never renewed. Furthermore, her car was left in Moorhead. If she left town, someone else would have had to drive her. As no one else went missing from the area at the time, she clearly did not run off with her boyfriend to start a new life together. As of February 2018, Miss Kidd would be 99 years old. Even if she did not meet with foul play at the time of her disappearance, it is unlikely that she would still be alive today. As her family does believe she was murdered in 1990, they are still searching for answers so that the person who took her from them can be brought to justice. They had her name engraved on her husband's tombstone in the Crick Cemetery in Moorhead in hopes that one day she can be laid to rest next to him. The case of Rosa Perel. Rosa Perel was born in Barcelona, a city in the province of Barcelona. Rosa was a beautiful girl, but she had difficulty studying. At the age of 16, while still in school, she started working in a nightclub, first as a dancer and then as a waitress. While working at the nightclub, Rosa met many men. It is said that many of them came to the club just to meet and get to know her. In 2000, while working there, she met Ruben, a musician who had just started working at the same club. They quickly fell in love. Eventually, they decided to leave the nightlife behind. Rosa quit her job at the nightclub and joined the Barcelona City Police. Ruben followed her shortly after, but he chose to join the Catalonian Autonomous Police. After 10 years of living together, Rosa and Ruben had 2 daughters, whose names were not disclosed. A year after the birth of their second daughter, Rosa and Ruben got married. Friends and family described Rosa as selfish and lacking in empathy, often showing indifference and cruelty towards others. During her 10 years of marriage to Ruben, Rosa remained intimate with many other men, even continuing these relationships after they had children and got married. Ruben apparently did not know about Rosa's infidelity until she began a relationship with a man named Oscar, whose last name is not provided. Oscar was a sub-inspector at a police station where, in early 2008, intimate photos of Rosa were circulated, and she identified Oscar as a suspect. However, the case did not attract the attention of the court at the time and was closed. Years later, after it was revealed that Rosa was married, the case resurfaced and went to trial. Although the prosecution sought a prison sentence for Oscar for distributing the photos, the court was unable to prove his guilt due to insufficient evidence, resulting in his acquittal. Although this disturbing incident damaged Rosa's reputation among her colleagues and friends, she continued with her life. She then met a man named Pedro Rodriguez, and they quickly began a romantic relationship. Not much is known about his life before meeting Rosa, except that he was married to a woman named Patricia, with whom he had a child. Pedro also worked in the Guardia, like Ruben. After starting a relationship with Rosa, Pedro asked his wife for a divorce. Patricia learned from a friend that Pedro had been seen with a woman and 2 young daughters. Although Patricia did not know who they were, she suspected that Pedro was leading a double life, even though he claimed that he had never cheated during their marriage. Ruben discovered that his wife was having an affair with another police officer, Pedro, and decided to end the infidelity. He filed for divorce and ended his relationship with Rosa. A few months later, Rosa moved to another city with her daughters. At first, things seemed fine, but Rosa and Pedro's happiness did not last long, and their relationship quickly became strained. Both were prone to jealousy and emotional outbursts, leading to frequent arguments. The situation worsened when Albert, a man with whom Rosa was having an affair, showed up. Albert Lopez also worked in the Catalonia City Police Department, and their relationship began when they were patrol partners. Rosa maintained a complicated relationship with several men at the same time. One day at work, Albert was questioned about the death of a homeless man he had arrested during an operation against illegal street vendors. Rosa had been with Albert that day, and they claimed that the street vendor had attacked her with a knife before jumping off a 75-foot cliff. Despite many suspicious details, the police have no official evidence linking Albert to the incident. His co-workers described him as ruthless and powerful, noting that he used drugs to increase his muscle mass. Some acquaintances also labeled him as manipulative. After discovering that Rosa was married to Pedro, Albert sent her an incriminating recording of their conversation. On May 4, 2017, a resident discovered a burned-out car. When the police arrived, they were shocked to find the remains of a man in the trunk. Experts determined that the car belonged to Pedro Rodriguez, but they were cautious not to assume that the body was his. They began searching for Pedro to confirm his whereabouts, starting by checking to see if he was on duty. He had been suspended from work at the time due to an alleged assault. They then went to Pedro's ex-wife, Patricia. She was surprised to see the police. Patricia explained that she had been waiting for Pedro to pick up their children, but he had not arrived, and she had not been able to contact him. Since Pedro was missing, the police decided to contact Rosa. Rosa said she did not know Pedro's whereabouts, and mentioned that a few days prior, she had a disagreement with him about her ex-husband, Ruben, which forced her to leave the house. The body was found completely charred, making identification difficult. The body was then sent for an autopsy. The police identified the body through dental records as Pedro Rodriguez. They began an investigation suspecting that Rosa's ex-husband Ruben may have been involved in the case. After questioning Ruben, he stated that he was on duty at the time of Pedro's death. His alibi was confirmed, causing the police to refocus their attention on Rosa. They quickly dismissed the theory that Rosa's ex-husband was the killer. They discovered that Rosa had an affair with Albert, leading them to speculate that Pedro may have known about it, potentially providing a motive for the murder. Rosa was brought in for questioning. She alleged that Albert was the one who killed Pedro. She claimed that on the night of May 1st, Albert came to her house armed and angry and forced her to lock herself and her children on the top floor. He threatened her, warning that her daughters would be in danger if she reported him. This made her feel that she needed to protect them. Rosa's testimony led to Albert's arrest. During questioning, Albert denied all of Rosa's accusations and accused her of killing Pedro. He claimed that Rosa had called him on the night of the incident, and when he arrived, he found Pedro's body in the trunk of his car. He tried to convince Rosa to contact the police, but she refused. He argued that he felt he had no choice but to help cover up the crime. Ultimately, despite their attempts to blame each other, technology uncovered the truth. Geolocation data from Rosa and Albert's cell phones showed that they were present at the location where Pedro's body was discovered. Additionally, the data indicated that before Pedro's cell phone stopped sending signals, all three phones were at the house where Rosa lived with her two daughters and Pedro. This new evidence led to the arrest of Rosa and Albert on May 13, 2017, and they remained in custody until the case went to trial. Rosa was taken to Buttra Women's Prison, and the trial began on February 3, 2020, 3 years after Pedro's death. During the trial, both Rosa and Albert claimed innocence and testified against each other. Rosa stated that she was one of the few witnesses to the incident, asserting that her children were sleeping upstairs when Albert came to their home armed. This contradicted her previous statement, in which she said that the children had witnessed everything from the beginning. Additionally, her account did not match that of Antonia, who was with Ruben, the children's father, at the time. Antonia testified that her eldest daughter told her she saw her mother covered in blood on the night Pedro was believed to have died. However, the court dismissed Antonia's testimony. As the trial continued, Rosa's true nature began to come to light. Several disturbing details emerged, including intimate text messages exchanged between Rosa and Albert on the day of Pedro's death. A friend of Rosa's testified that Rosa had planned to start a serious relationship with one of the two men. The friend revealed that Rosa had confided in her that she was leaning toward Pedro because she found him more attractive and a better lover. The lawyer representing Pedro's family claimed that the relationship between Rosa and Pedro was deteriorating. He argued that Pedro may have had information that could threaten Rosa and Albert's interests regarding the suspicious death of a street vendor. The lawyer claimed that Albert and Rosa wanted to prevent Pedro from revealing evidence against them, which motivated their decision to kill him. The judge confirmed that Albert and Rosa had jointly decided to kill Pedro, the only witness, and that they had planned the crime throughout April. He found that they had given inconsistent statements and changed their testimonies during the investigation. Unfortunately, the exact cause of Pedro's murder could not be determined. By the end of March 2020, a jury had found Rosa Perel and Albert Lopez guilty of the intentional murder of Pedro Rodriguez. Albert was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Rosa received a 25-year sentence. The court also ordered both defendants to pay $885,000 in compensation to Pedro's family. Although the trial ended with a guilty verdict, the situation did not end there. Even while in prison, Rosa attracted considerable media attention due to her disruptive and chaotic behavior, which led to her being transferred from facility to facility during the first 2 years of her sentence. Ruben did not allow his daughters to visit Rosa in prison. But then Ruben allowed the children to see Rosa. After Rosa had served 4 years and had multiple disciplinary violations, she was transferred to another prison for the 5th time due to her role in inciting conflicts with other inmates. The prison authorities decided to transfer her to Rick Prison. Rosa's intimate relationships continued after her sentencing. After her incarceration, Rosa learned of her mother's death, which caused her great distress due to her separation from her family. Reports indicate that Rosa's mother's mental health had deteriorated, which is why she was absent from the trial. Rosa's father, who spoke to the media, stated that due to his wife's declining mental condition, she did not understand the circumstances surrounding their daughter's incarceration. claimed that when her mother was ill, she used her authorized prison calls to check on her well-being. However, police received anonymous information suggesting that Rosa had also used these calls to contact a hitman and plot the murder of her ex-husband, Ruben. As of early October 2023, the truth of these claims is still under investigation. During her first 100 days in prison, Rosa used her phone calls to contact media representatives and film producers interested in her story. Even though this contact was not authorized by the prison, she may have used intermediaries to make these calls. A notable project related to Rosa's case is a documentary titled The Rosa Pearl Tapes based on her final interview. In this interview, Rosa strongly proclaimed her innocence and argued that she was a victim of social injustice, claiming that she had been unjustly condemned. Media reports stated that journalists, prosecutors, and lawyers involved in Rosa's trial had filed complaints against the producers. They claimed that the show was designed to portray the convicts from the perspective of the victims and distort the truth. In addition, Rosa collaborated with others to create a series called Body on Fire, which detailed the events surrounding Pedro's death and the subsequent arrest of Rosa and Albert. This project also caused considerable controversy. After watching some excerpts, Rosa expressed her dissatisfaction, stating that the story presented to the screenwriters undermined her dignity and could negatively impact her integration into society. With the support of a lawyer, Rosa tried to stop the release of the show by filing a lawsuit against its creators. Unfortunately, her efforts were unsuccessful, as 8 episodes were released on a popular channel on September 8, 2023. The lawsuit against the creators of the series did not make much progress, and the court dismissed her request. Undaunted, Rosa managed to bypass prison security and gave an interview to a public radio station. During the interview, Rosa expressed concern that the series might negatively affect her law studies, which she had begun while in prison to create a better future for her daughters after her sentence ended. The police then restricted her communication with the outside world, allowing contact only with close family members. Meanwhile, the legal representative of Pedro's family requested that all income from the series and documentaries that Rosa and Albert received be confiscated. It is clear that Rosa's story will continue to be told. We can only hope that her children, who have also been affected by these events, will not suffer any further and will receive the support they need to cope with the challenges they have faced and will continue to face. Our first case today takes us to Rock County, a county in the southwestern corner of the state of Minnesota. Although Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, Rock County is one of the 4 countries that does not have a natural lake. On March 13, 1981, while on a routine city cleanup, a Department of Transport worker was busy clearing out the concrete culverts along Interstate 90, off Highway 23, and Beaver Creek Township as he raked away the debris. He was shocked when he came across some skeletal remains. The worker immediately contacted his supervisor, who called the police. When police arrived, the area was sealed off and all present were questioned regarding the discovery. The supervisor explained that the culverts were cleared out annually and the last cleanup occurred on October 21, 1980. Investigators surmised that the body may have been dumped in the culvert any time between October 1980 and 1981. Forensic technicians and crime scene investigators removed the body in work to collect any possible clues that may have been left behind. The body was transported to Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office. Identifying the John Doe proved to be a difficult task for the medical examiner. The body had been badly decomposed and was barely recognizable. From what remained of the near-complete skeleton, the coroner determined the John Doe to be a white male between the ages of 30 to 50 years old. His estimated height was between 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. There was no way to determine weight, hair, or eye color, given the condition of the body, nor were there any distinguishing birthmarks or tattoos. The cause of death was listed as a homicide, with the coroner remarking that there was a possibility the victim had been shot. There had been a wound to the skull that was consistent with a small caliber gun, but no gun or shell casing was found in the area. Plaster casts of his teeth were taken for dental record purposes and DNA samples were extracted from the remains. Getting fingerprints have proved impossible as his fingertips had disintegrated with decomposition. The victim was found clothed in green cotton work pants, a leather belt and boxer shorts. He wore either light tan or white slip-on engineer boots size 8 to 9 and 2 pairs of green socks on each foot. In his possession was a black plastic comb and a locket with a baby's picture on the inside. Using this vague description, investigators began an extensive search on the area, questioning the workers from the Department of Transport who had worked the area since the previous October. A rough sketch was developed by a police artist, along with details provided by the medical examiner. Hostas were made and circulated in and around Beaver Creek Township. They also questioned motorists who used the road frequently about any unusual activity in the area. Locals to the area were questioned regarding the John Doe, who was found in the culvert, but no one seemed to recall anyone fitting his description. A search of missing persons databases in and around Minnesota yielded no results, and it seemed as if no one knew who this man could be. A lack of leads ultimately led to the case growing cold. No one had come forward to report anyone missing in the area. Although police periodically looked over the file, nothing new came of the information. As technology advanced, DNA profiles of known criminals were becoming digitized in order to allow law enforcement to have quicker and easier access to records. A profile had been developed of the Rock County John Doe back in 1981 and was used to search for him on national criminal databases. However, this too proved futile as there was no records of the victim found. The case lay cold for decades without any new information. In 2018, genetic genealogy began changing the face of criminal investigations. Having used this new technology to track down and capture the infamous Golden State Killer, other law enforcement agencies soon took notice. This technology, they believed, would surely be a game changer in identifying unsolved cold cases. The Rock County Sheriff's Office partnered with the nonprofit agency, the Doe Network, in August 2022 and reopened the Rock County John Doe case. They developed a digital composite sketch from the autopsy photos of the John Doe that was uploaded to their site and all other missing person databases. The next task was to raise enough funds to pay for DNA testing. Through community initiatives and fundraisers, the sheriff's office were able to reach their target and pay for all the tests needed to perform the task. Working with the genealogy websites, volunteers from the Doe Network used the DNA samples provided by the sheriff's office to start tracing familial connections. After a few months of poring through thousands of family trees, they were able to find a familial mat in Omaha, Nebraska. The team then made contact with the woman who said she didn't know of any relative who had lived in Rock County or went missing but was willing to meet with them. After contacting agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and investigators from the Rock County Sheriff's Office, officials made their way to Omaha. In early November 2022, in Omaha, investigators met with the members of the Gadiano family and the woman who was the closest match to John Doe's profile. The family members volunteered their DNA for testing. On December 20th, 2022, investigators discovered that two of the profiles matched the strongest against their John Doe's profile. They returned to Omaha with the results and met with the woman who uploaded her profile to the genealogy website, along with her aunt and uncle. During interviews with the family, detectives discovered that the woman's aunt actually had a brother who had gone missing in 1971 named Luis Anthony Gasciano. When they showed investigators a picture of Luis, they knew they had found their John Doe. The family could not provide much information about Luis' life, as many of their family members had since passed. Luis would have been born sometime in 1946. What they did reveal to investigators was that Luis had been a notorious bank robber in the 1960s. According to his family and archived news articles, Luis had first been accused of robbing a bank in his hometown of Omaha. He was eventually caught while trying to rob a First National City Bank in New York on January 25, 1966 for $96,400 when he was 20 years old. According to reports, Luis was overpowered by the bank teller and ended up shooting the counter instead. He had injured his hand in the scuffle. The article states that Luis told detectives he had been desperate and depressed and wanted his life to be over. Luis was charged with attempted robbery, felonious assault, and weapons possession. Since then, family members heard from him infrequently, but all communication had ceased from 1971. He was not reported missing at the time because he had a strained relationship with his family. They were just as baffled to hear he had been murdered 10 years after losing contact with his family. No one had ever come forward looking for Luis since he had been missing. For investigators, half the battle has been won, as they know their John Doe's identity. Rock County Sheriff Evan Verbrugge said the moment was bittersweet. While it's not news anyone wants, Luis Gasciano's family, at long last, has some answers. And while there is still much more to be learned about Mr. Gasciano's death, knowing his identity, even decades after he died, is a critically important new clue in this case, he said. Verbrugge said the case will remain open, despite the uphill challenge. It's going to be difficult for us to find out, but our job is to try and get answers and the cost is minimal, he said. Authorities urge anyone who may have known Luis Anthony Gasciano between 1971 and 1981 or has any other information about the case to come forward and contact the Rock County Sheriff's Office. Numbers will be made available in the description box below. Our next case takes us to Rock County, Wisconsin. It is a country of open spaces and parks, and offers anyone a chance to enjoy the great outdoors and a chance to reconnect with nature. But for 27 years, a mystery baffled law enforcement officials until new DNA testing brought some much-needed answers. On November 11, 1995, in a wooded area near Bradford, Wisconsin, a group of hunters were tracking down a herd of deer. Gary Gilbank wanted to share with his nephews his passion for hunting, unaware that he was about to show them a sight from a horror movie instead. As they reached the southern bank of the Turtle Creek, they stopped short. On the ground lay the skeletal remains of a man. It baffled them. They owned the very land the skeleton lay on, and none of them knew who it belonged to or how it came to be here. Without hesitation, they contacted the police. Investigators arrived and immediately cordoned off the scene to begin their investigation. He appeared to be laying on his belly, with his hands over his head. His head and back were partially covered by a denim jacket, and he had been wearing a t-shirt with the name of the British band Venom on it, and a plaid shirt. He also wore gray camouflage pants, and there was one Nike sneaker next to the body. The other was not found. Investigators collected a chrome pendant of a horned goat, a Budweiser lighter, an Aquatech wristwatch, and a tube of Carmex lip balm from the scene. The remains were removed and transported to the coroner's office for further examination. The coroner began an extensive examination of John Doe. There had been no signs of trauma visible on the remains. His height was estimated to be between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches, with his weight at 140 pounds. His estimated age was between 17 to 20 years old. Using a dental analysis, the coroner determined that he had been a Caucasian male. He had received good dental care with only 2 fillings. He still had his wisdom teeth intact, with 2 having partially erupted and 1 being impacted. Samples of hair were taken for a toxicology analysis. There was no trace of cocaine, codeine, or morphine, which ruled out the possibility of an overdose due to long-term opioid addiction. But the coroner did not rule out that he may have been intoxicated or had taken hallucinogenic drugs prior to his death. His cause of death was not determined, but it was possible that he had died from hypothermia after falling into the creek. The coroner believed that it was possible he may have been intoxicated and become disoriented before deciding to lay down, and had died as a result of exposure to the elements. There had also been speculation as to his exact time of death. The coroner estimated that he may have died around fall or winter of 1994. Investigators had no leads apart from the clues they found on the John Doe at the scene. They launched a full-on investigation that led them down several paths. In the meanwhile, John Doe's skull was cremated, and the ashes together with his remains were buried at the Johnson Town Center Cemetery used to bury John and Jane Does. Working on the theory that he may have been intoxicated and disoriented, investigators searched all known accidents that occurred around the estimated time of John Doe's death. They believed he may have been the survivor of a car wreck, and had wandered off after the accident. However, no reports were made of a missing man fitting his description. In fact, there had been no missing persons reports made of any man fitting John Doe's description. Investigators then revisited all rock concerts that were held in the area based on the clothes he was wearing at the time he was found. People from within the heavy metal community were interviewed, but no one remembered anyone who fit John Doe's description. They had reached another dead end here. Given his estimated age, they searched through school yearbooks and government records, but found none of the teenagers in that time period were reported missing. Interviews with the students from the local school district provided no leads either, leading investigators back to square one. The investigation then turned to several witness statements about a man that was dubbed River Guy by the locals. According to witnesses, on October 16, 1994, at around 5:30 p.m., a young man in his early 20s was seen running toward the creek, where the body was eventually discovered. Witnesses alleged that the River Guy was wearing clothes similar to the John Doe and had been intoxicated and distraught that afternoon. Statements made by these witnesses include that the man had been stumbling along toward the creek and had fallen several times into the water as he tried to climb the embankment. They also alleged he had yelled at bystanders to get away from him, and he mentioned being wronged by a woman named Mary and being a fugitive. The theory remained one of the strongest until later forensic tests proved that River Guy and John Doe may not have been the same person due to time discrepancies. According to later forensic estimations, The John Doe's rate of decomposition showed that he may have died around May 1995 and not in October 1994, when River Guy was last seen. This also dispelled the initial estimated time of death given by the original medical examiner. The next lead came in the form of a pendant found at the scene. In 2010, detectives from the Rock County Sheriff's Office traced the pendant back to a Janesville area craftsman. The man had been active in the local metal rock scene and had crafted several rock and metal-inspired pieces for fans. When shown the pendant, he told police that it was indeed one of his pieces. However, he made several similar pendants and over the years had sold them to dozens of people. When shown a composite sketch of John Clinton Doe, the craftsman was unable to recognize him as a possible customer. This caused yet another hurdle in the investigation. The Rock County Sheriff's Office teamed up with the Smithsonian Institution scientists to perform an isotopic analysis of the John Doe's bones. Isotopic analysis has been used in forensic anthropology to determine the region of origin of unidentified human remains. From bone tissue, forensic scientists can determine the region of birth of a person. The Smithsonian scientists discovered that John Doe had spent a significant amount of time in the Midwestern area around the Great Lakes. These areas included the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. This information allowed investigators to narrow down the field of investigation. Having identified the John Doe's possible birth area, investigators went back to the drawing board in 2016 and reworked the composite sketches developed by the Rock County Sheriff's Department and the FBI in 2013 and 2014 respectively. This time they regressed the sketch to age 16 and added some color, before distributing it to the public. Private investigator Jack Fries said that the department hoped it would refresh the memory of anyone who may have interacted with him that year. The whole idea here is to get people to think about what was going on in the early 90s and in their lives, and do they have any connection with this guy at all, he said. Their attempts had failed, but investigators were not to give up so easily. For the next 2 years, private investigator Jack Fries continued at work finding a way to identify the young John Doe. In June 2018, Fries together with Detective Corin Billhorn reached out to the DNA Doe Project, a non-profit volunteer-based group that helps with identifying unsolved John and Jane Doe cases. Using the DNA extracted and preserved from the original autopsy, the team set out to find the identity of the John Doe. In partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Flugent Genetics, Aerodyne Research Incorporated, and Full Genome Corporation, the long journey began. Using genetic genealogy and ancestry website GeneMatch, the research team were able to locate and find possible relatives of John Clinton Doe in February 2019. They had a tentative identity, but investigators needed to be 100% sure. Over the next 3 years, investigators worked with the University of North Texas as they tracked down relatives of the John Doe. Upon interviewing with the relatives, they discovered that 2 of the volunteers may share a half-sibling relationship with the John Doe through their father. Country officials applied for and received a warrant to exhume the body of the potential father. In late 2021, once DNA was extracted, testing once again began in earnest and they finally announced the identity of John Clinton Doe. On June 14, 2020, County Sheriff's Office announced that Carl Isaacs Jr. age 20 was identified as the body in the creek. Carl was born on April 30, 1974 in Delavan, Wisconsin. His parents divorced when he was very young, and it seemed that he had never quite recovered from the trauma. Carl had attended an alternative high school for Badger, Delavan, Darien, and Elkhorn area high school students. In 1991, at age 17, Carl had developed a substance addiction. He had also joined a group of friends who engineered a crime spree, resulting in damage to property and multiple burglaries. In March 1992, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for burglary and vandalism of golf carts at the Delbrick Golf Course in Delavan. Between April of 1992 and fall of 1993, Carl was sent to 3 different prisons, finally settling at the Oak Hill Correctional Institute in Oregon, Wisconsin. While there, he had been released to undergo a substance abuse recovery program at a halfway house in Madison. He was also occasionally allowed to return to his mother's home under house arrest. Carl sometimes played the role of informant to authorities in drug-related cases. In April 1995, he had been on one of his house arrest visits. On April 16, 1995, he had suddenly disappeared. He was never heard from or seen again. A county judge immediately signed an arrest warrant for Carl for probation violation. That had been renewed annually until April 2018. Investigator Jack Fries pointed out that no one had really come forward reporting Carl Isaacs as missing during the time he disappeared, which complicated their investigation. In this case, mom and dad were divorced. He was kind of living with his mom, although I don't think he stayed there very often. He was kind of on the streets, basically homeless. I don't think he had a friend, nobody at all, who would have missed him to the point where they tried to find him, he said. Fries believed that something drove Carl to break the rules of his probation and leave his house. During the announcement of the identity of Carl Isaacs Jr. at the press conference held on June 14, 2022, Rock County Sheriff Troy Knutson said that it was a sad moment, but also a resolution to a decades-long mystery. I'm kind of sad to have to get together and discuss the untimely death of a young individual in our community, but I'm glad to finally be able to bring a little bit of resolution to the individual's identity. Knutson declined answering any questions as to why family never reported him missing or any details about them. He did, however, indicate that the family had been bracing for the news following the discovery of the DNA matches and the investigation. Instead, he reminded all those present that the case was still ongoing. We're really looking to flesh out exactly who he was and how he found himself in that particular location. That's where we're looking to the community to help provide some of those details for us, he said. Nunn's son added that the investigation was a lengthy process, but with the help of technological advancements, it made the identification possible. He thanked and credited Jack Fries, who was a former employee of the Rock County Coroner's Office, who assisted voluntarily on the case. He also thanked the DNA Doe Project, which provided police with investigative breakthrough that helped identify Carl Isaacs. Nick Gilbank, who was the man that discovered Carl's body, still remembers the moment he found the body in the creek. I walked over to see what I was looking at, and there next to a garbage bag of his belongings was a clothed skeleton. I remember kneeling down and picking up the shirt, and there was a skull, completely decomposed. Although he still has some questions, he is glad that there's some kind of closure in knowing John Doe's identity. I guess I'm glad they finally identified the remains, he said. The case of Catherine Wellsborough. Catherine Wellsborough was born in 1989 in the United Kingdom to parents Phil and Jane Wellsborough. She has an older sister named Lynn. In the February, Catherine met Rofel Novak, a 31-year-old coworker, on a university break while working on a new vacuum cleaner production line. Rofel was an immigrant from Poland with a previous marriage and a son, had moved to England 4 years earlier seeking a better life. Rofel and Catherine started dating, initially meeting for lunch at the production site cafe, but soon progressing to romantic dinners. Rofel showered Catherine with gifts, took Catherine to movies, and went on walks with Catherine. As their relationship deepened, Rofel shared his past and reasons for moving to the UK with Catherine. Rodel's trustworthy nature allows her to open up completely to him. Within a few months, Catherine introduced Rodhel to her parents, who welcomed him into their family and hoped for Rodhel and Catherine's future happiness. Soon, Rethless and Catherine began planning their wedding. Catherine graduated with honors from Bath Spa University in February 2011 and secured a promising job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the manufacturer of Henry vacuum cleaners. Her career progressed quickly, helping her have good job opportunities. Catherine is smart, highly educated, and has good interaction skills with others. She shows genuine interest in her co-workers' problems and cares for those around her. Her kind demeanor and radiant smile have earned her the admiration of her colleagues, who view her as a young leader. Catherine's career was advancing swiftly, and her substantial earnings, combined with those of her partner Rofel, allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace in Willow Way. Although they were financially secure, they opted to take out a mortgage, securing insurance coverage as per their agreement with the bank. With their youth, successful careers, and love for each other, it seemed they had all the ingredients for happiness. However, the fateful day of September 12, 2012, marked a turning point in their lives, changing everything forever. On September 12, 2012, Orlando, a local resident, was driving home after a night shift at the gas station. He is in a hurry to take his daughter Maria to kindergarten as he promised his wife. While driving, he noticed black smoke coming from a nearby parking lot after turning a sharp corner. Smoke billowed from a car engulfed in flames. Orlando stopped and tried to get a closer look but couldn't due to the intense fire. When firefighters arrived 4 minutes later, the car was completely burned out. The police cordoned off the area to keep onlookers away. The location was relatively deserted due to the early hour, and there were no witnesses to the incident. Upon investigation, a charred body was found. The police needed to identify the victim and determine the cause of death. There were no signs of a car accident or any evidence of another vehicle being involved. The police initially suspected that the car may have caught fire due to a malfunction or self-ignition. A thorough investigation was conducted, involving multiple expert analyses. The remains were sent to a forensic laboratory to determine the identity and cause of death. The police also examined fragments of the burned vehicle to identify any malfunctions and establish the cause of the fire. The police began by checking the missing persons database and recent reports of disappearances. They quickly identified the deceased as 23-year-old Catherine Wells Barr. On the same day, Rofel Novak filed a missing persons report for his girlfriend, Catherine. According to Rofel, he left for work at 5:30 a.m. while Catherine was still asleep. When she failed to show up for work, and Rafel couldn't find her at any of her relatives' homes, he contacted the police. The investigation involved interviewing the victim's family, including her parents and sister, as well as Rofel, her colleagues, and friends. By gathering information about the last days and years of Catherine's life, the police were able to reconstruct the events leading up to her tragic death. The investigation into Catherine's disappearance continued to uncover shocking details about her life with Rafel. As the truth began to emerge, it became clear that their relationship had been built on lies from the start. A 29-year-old man from Poland had left his wife and child behind to escape his debts. He moved to the UK, where he met Anna Levick, with whom he had a long-term relationship starting in February 2008. When Raphael met Catherine, he initially maintained relationships with both women. However, he eventually chose Catherine, believing she offered more stability and financial security. Catherine, unaware of Rofel's true intentions, genuinely desired a happy marriage and family with him. Meanwhile, Rofel was secretly planning to kill Catherine. Intending to use the life insurance payout in the large house they shared to find a new life with his mistress, Anna. The murder was carefully planned and executed with exceptional cruelty. On the day Catherine went missing, Rofel waited a few hours before reporting her disappearance to her boss. Pretending to be frantically worried about her whereabouts, he feigned panic and despair in front of Catherine's colleagues and relatives, claiming she had been receiving threatening letters from a mentally unstable admirer. When Catherine's car was found missing and she was not at her parents' home or her own, Rofel's fake concern led Catherine's family to contact the police. Rofel recounted that the evening before her disappearance had been normal evening. Rofel and Catherine went for a walk, bought groceries, had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed together. Catherine seemed calm. However, a thorough investigation revealed that her death occurred earlier. She was strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her own bed while asleep. Her body was placed in the car, driven a short distance, and set on fire to destroy evidence. Rofel Novak had a solid alibi as he was at work from 5:30 a.m. He claimed Catherine was asleep in bed when he left. The burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. However, Rofel was still at home at 1:30 a.m., which significantly altered the case's direction. As a result, Rofel Novak became the prime suspect in Catherine Wells Barr's murder. The evidence allowed for Rofel to be detained pending further investigation. Rofel claimed that Catherine was being stalked, which had caused her significant distress. However, during the investigation, it was discovered that Catherine had a secret online life. She had accounts on several adult websites, where she shared intimate photos and engaged in flirtatious conversations with men. A letter from a secret admirer was also found. Despite attempts to mislead the investigation, evidence was uncovered that proved Rafel's direct involvement in Catherine's demise. Notably, Rofel had a motive to kill Catherine. Investigators found that he had been in continuous communication with Anna Legwinowicz, and they had met regularly over the past few months. Furthermore, it was discovered that Reffless had a financial motive. Shortly before Catherine's death, they had both taken out life insurance policies worth £123,000. Rofel and Catherine were the sole beneficiaries of each other's policies, meaning they would receive the payouts in the event of the other's death. The main motive behind Catherine's death and the burning of her car to mislead the investigation was found to be a large life insurance payout. On the day she went missing, Catherine sent a message to Anna's phone. Additionally, security cameras showed Anna and her uncle filling a gas can at a gas station a few days before the crime. This new information brought a third person into the investigation. Anna Ladvinovic, 32, and her uncle, Tadeusz Dimitrisen, 38, along with Rofel Novak, are suspected of being accomplices in a premeditated crime and arson to cover up evidence. The crime was carefully planned by them over several months. They created accounts on adult websites, uploaded doctored images of Catherine, and created chats with various men to mislead the investigation. When faced with undeniable evidence, Rofel and Anna couldn't deny their involvement any longer and began blaming each other. Rofel claimed that Anna, driven by jealousy, planned and carried out the crime to eliminate Catherine. In contrast, Anna accused of committing the crime out of greed, seeking to secure the insurance payout for the house. To avoid detection, the conspirators forged much evidence related to Catherine. They created fake profiles about Catherine on dating websites, portraying her as a promiscuous and highly sexual woman. Also, to cover their tracks, the conspirators burned Catherine's body and created a fake story about her. They invented a fictitious lover, and they believed that he might be responsible for Catherine's death. One of the conspirators even sent a text message from Catherine's phone to this fictitious person, suggesting that she was on her way to meet him. However, forensic experts discovered that when the fire broke out, Catherine was only wearing her favorite nightgown, not an appropriate outfit to meet someone. Despite the evidence, Rofel refused to acknowledge his involvement in Catherine's death. Instead, he told Jane, Catherine's mother, that her daughter was receiving threatening emails and text messages from an ex-boyfriend who said if he couldn't have her, no one could. Rofel also claimed that Catherine had spoken of taking her own life. In a shocking display of deceit, Rofel allowed Catherine's parents to comfort him, believing he was also mourning the loss of Catherine he loved. Rofel's acting was incredibly convincing. After Catherine's death, her mother, Jane, was so taken in by his performance that she hugged him and allowed him to call her mom. Jane explained that in the early stages of the investigation, the police viewed Rofel more as a witness than a suspect, so she decided to offer him her full support. Her reasoning was that if Catherine had loved him that much and he was considered part of their family, then he deserved their support. The trial, chaired by Justice Sharp, began, and the jury heard that Rethlisel and his two co-defendants stood to gain a significant amount from Catherine's death. They hoped to receive a life insurance payout of £123,000 and half ownership of a two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000 during the trial. It was revealed that when police found Catherine's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12th, Rethlis showed no emotion. Anna Legwinowicz frequently shook her head and laughed in court when it was suggested she was responsible for the crime, but refused to testify. Tedds also chose not to testify in his defense. The judge, Justice Sharp, told the defendants the murder was a horrific and merciless crime. The defendants showed no emotion during sentencing. The judge described Anna Legwinowicz's behavior as deceitful, manipulative, and cruel, and stated she played a significant role in the crime. He also told to deputies that the murder was committed for gain, with many aggravating circumstances and no mitigating ones. The judge expressed deep sympathy for Catherine's parents, who had no idea that Rofel Novak's charming facade hid a monster. Rofel's actions were driven by financial gain, as he had no emotional ties to Catherine. Catherine's mother stated that the brutal and calculated manner of her daughter's death would haunt them forever. She regretted not having the chance to say goodbye or express her love, and now considers Rofel an evil person who deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. Catherine's father, Philip, added that they had welcomed Rofel into their home, treating him like a son, only to be betrayed by him. During the trial, Rofel Novak became emotional in the witness box. He denied any involvement in the death of his girlfriend, Catherine Wells-Bear. Rofel claimed everyone was blaming him for a crime he did not commit. However, the court heard that Rofel showed no emotion when the police discovered Catherine's body in her burned-out car on September. Catherine's mother, Jane Wells-Bear, testified that after his initial release from police custody, Rethlisel asked for a steak dinner and didn't even mention Catherine. Jane Wells-Bear stated that her daughter's fate was sealed when she and Rofel bought a house together and took out a life insurance policy. She believes that in signing the contract, Catherine also signed her own death warrant. Ultimately, the court found Rofel Novak guilty of suffocating Catherine with a pillow while she slept. He had conspired with his secret lover, Anna Legwinowicz, and her uncle to deaths to claim a £123,000 life insurance payout and a share of the house. Anna and Tadevs had transported Catherine's body in her car to a remote location and set it on fire. Rofel and Anna were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years, while Tadevs received a 27-year sentence. After the verdict, Catherine's parents, Philip and Jane Wells-Bear, advocated for stricter immigration laws. They believed that if the UK had more stringent immigration rules like the US, Rofel Novak would not have been allowed entry. Rofel had previously been convicted of assaulting his wife in Poland. Philip and Jane, who divorced after Catherine's death, blamed the European Union for the UK's lenient immigration policies. Jane stated that the UK does not thoroughly check people entering the country. She was unaware of Raffel's previous assault charge in Poland and believes the government needs to prevent individuals like Raffel from freely entering the country. Following the verdict, Catherine's mother paid tribute to her daughter, describing her as a beautiful, determined, and hardworking individual who earned a first-class degree from the University of Bath Spa. Catherine's family expressed their devastation and loss, stating they were proud of her accomplishments and had no idea how to move forward without her. They believed she had great potential and a promising life ahead, but it was cruelly taken away from her and her loved ones. The Blissfield Township in Michigan is a mix of rural and suburban living. With a population of 3,905, it is a close-knit and conservative farming community with acres of surrounding cornfields. It is tucked away between bigger towns, giving residents a sanctuary away from the fast-paced life of the 21st century. It is here the mystery of the John Doe in the cornfield begins. In the early hours of November 19, 1997, a Lenawee County farmer went down to inspect his cornfield as he made preparations to cut the stalks down for the harvest. There had been some light snow the previous evening, but not enough to damage any crops. As he made his way closer to the edge of the field, he noticed a bulge on the ground that was covered by a light dusting of snow. As he drew closer, he realized he was staring down at a dead body. However, the body was missing its head and both hands. Extremely shaken by what he had seen, he contacted the police, who arrived at the farm with haste. When forensic teams arrived, they quickly determined the body had been dumped here a while ago and that it was male. It had already begun decomposing with insect and animal activity, contributing to the further degradation of the body. The area was searched for evidence, but nothing was found. It was becoming clear to investigators that it was a homicide, and a violent one too. It was also clear the crime had occurred in a different place, and the remains were dumped in the cornfield, as there were no traces of blood surrounding the body like there would have been if its limbs had been removed in the field. Also, the Section 22 roadway of Blissfield Township was just 50 yards away from the crime scene, giving people easy access to the space. The body was taken to the coroner's office for further examination. There were no distinguishing marks, such as scars, tattoos, or birthmarks anywhere on the body. The medical examiner estimated that the murder occurred within the last 3 months due to the state of decomposition. Looking closely at the wounds made from the dismemberment, the examiner noted that the victim's body parts had been sawed off. There were saw striations around the neck bones and wrist bones. The examiner believed that it was clearly an attempt to hinder investigators in identifying the victim. The coroner was able to gather some basic information based on tissue samples and estimations. He determined the victim to be light-skinned, of Hispanic descent, and between the ages of 20 to 40. The estimated height of the victim was between 5 feet 8 inches and 5 feet 10 inches with a weight of around 150 pounds. Investigators set out to find answers. Without a head or hands, there was no way to ascertain the identity of the victim. They searched missing persons databases and questioned people from the area. A theory that did take hold was that the victim was a part of a drug deal gone wrong. A few locals alleged that a drug deal had recently occurred nearby in Toledo, Ohio. Investigators followed up on that lead, but it led nowhere. Another tip was received from an anonymous source early during the investigation in 1997. The caller told investigators that the body may have belonged to a man known only as Roberto. Roberto was described as a Hispanic male between the ages of 20 to 50 with dark hair and a mustache. According to the source, Roberto was from Texas. He was also married and a father. Roberto was allegedly on a trip to Chicago when he disappeared. They were also told that Roberto had a house somewhere between McAllen and Weslaco in Texas, where he raised chickens. Using this information, investigators entered these details into the National Missing and Unidentified Person Systems known as NAMOS. A composite sketch was developed and circulated to local news outlets, but sadly, this lead ended up going nowhere in the end. The pressure of solving the case started to grow on investigators, but unable to locate the head and hands, they were left chasing shadows. Over the years, they looked into the case trying to find new leads, but nothing seemed to ever actually go anywhere. Eventually, the body was given the placeholder name of Lenawee County John Doe and buried in a pauper cemetery in 1997. 2 years later, in September 1999, a DNA profile of the victim was developed, but it did not lead investigators anywhere at the time. It was uploaded to the NAMOS database, but there was still no positive identification. For a time, the investigation went cold again, as no one came forward with any new information. In 2016, the case became active once again. Police were investigating drug-related crimes in the area and believed there to be suspected links to the John Doe case. However, nothing panned out at the time. Then, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the John Doe case was put on the back burner for a while. But the development of a new cold case unit in 2022 brought the Lenawee County John Doe case back into the spotlight. The unit was made up of state police detectives as well as criminal justice students and faculty members from Michigan State University. After much investigation and reconstruction of the crime, there finally was a breakthrough in the case. 25 years after the murder in 2023, Michigan authorities announced that 2 Ohio men were arrested in connection with the 1997 John Doe case. An arrest warrant was issued on January 17, 2023, for brothers Ricardo Sepulveda, aged 51 from Cincinnati, and Michael Sepulveda, aged 49 from Toledo. The 2 men were arrested on the same day the arrest warrant was issued by U.S. Marshals, who had been assisting with the investigation. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel thanked the teams for their persistence in following up the leads on the case and making the arrests. Michigan State Police worked with multiple local and federal law enforcement agencies and prosecutors to gather evidence and establish a timeline of events. I am grateful for their persistence in pursuing this case. All crime victims deserve justice, regardless of how long it takes to receive it, said Nessel in a news release. No information has yet been released on how investigators narrowed down the search to both Sepulveda brothers, but it is alleged a possible drug debt incident may have been the contributing factor. Both Ricardo Sepulveda and his brother Michael have been on police radar since early on in the investigation, said Sergeant Larry Rothman, who headed the cold case unit. These guys have been on our radar, so to speak, since early on, based on the dealings that they've had in the Toledo area with narcotics and drugs. That's how they are probably connected to our victim through the drug trade, said Rothman. One of the leads, said Rothman, had come from a woman in the Upper Peninsula who recalled a slaying that had followed a similar pattern. Both men were extradited to Lenawee County, with Michael waiving his right to extradition, while Ricardo underwent a hearing with the Michigan Attorney General. If convicted, they will face several charges that carry life sentences, including first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. The other charges include assault with intent to maim, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy to commit tampering with evidence, which all carry a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison each. Although the 2 suspects are in custody, the investigation remains ongoing. Rothman said it was still early in the investigation, but the arrest could be the key to the case. It's still early in the investigation, so there's not a whole lot I can say. But we feel these 2 guys knew the victim. They were acquaintances at one point. The John Doe still remains unidentified, but investigators are working with crime labs and genealogy databases to find answers. The DNA profile from 1999 has been uploaded to several genealogy websites, with investigators hoping for a positive result. Rothman called genetic genealogy testing a breakthrough in solving crimes. The potential to be able to solve decades-old cases that we didn't have before with genealogy and technology is kind of a breakthrough thing, he said. Sergeant Rothman said there were still a few things out there they were trying to piece together, and there is the possibility that more people could be charged in connection with the murder. We're hoping other people come forward. There's no doubt that other people from the time period know some things, he said. Someone's potentially missing a dad. Someone's potentially missing a husband. There's somebody out there, and we believe this person might be from Texas, and someone's missing their loved one, and they have no clue where they went. They just know they left in 1997 and never returned, said Rothman. With the advancements in technology and the use of genetic genealogy in solving cases that would have otherwise been forgotten, answers to long-lost mysteries are now being found. In highlighting these cases, we hope that we can aid investigations by bringing awareness to a wider audience. Information regarding who to contact in this case will be left in the description box. If you or anyone you know has been missing a loved one, please use the platforms available to contact your local authorities with any information that can help solve a case. Case of Lisa Holm. Lisa Holm was born on February 7, 1998, in the small Swedish town of Ho, where she grew up in a peaceful environment with her parents and older sister. Lisa was a kind, positive, and determined individual with a strong personality. She had already made up her mind to study architecture in Australia before completing her education. Lisa's love for travel was sparked by numerous trips with her parents to various countries, which also instilled in her a sense of independence from her teenage years. To earn her own money, she took on part-time jobs. In the summer of 2015, at the age of 17, Lisa landed her first job at a cafe located about 40 minutes from her home. Initially, her parents drove her to work, but soon her father gifted her a scooter. The scooter was a welcome gift, allowing her to commute to work independently. However, for the first few weeks, her father accompanied to ensure her safety, as she had limited experience driving on the roads. Lisa only works on weekends and her father always takes her to and from the cafe home. However, on June 7th, her father decided to let her drive herself. On that particular day, her parents visited her at work during lunch when the cafe was very busy. They had a quick snack together before returning home. Later that day at 6:23, Lisa sent her father a text saying she was leaving work. 3 minutes later, he received a call from her, but there was no answer when he picked up. He heard a soft voice over the phone and the sound of a car door closing, leading him to believe that Lisa had accidentally dialed his number while talking to a coworker. Despite calling out her name several times, he got no response and eventually ended the call, expecting her to arrive home soon. However, as the minutes ticked by, Lisa failed to show up, causing her parents to grow increasingly worried. It was her first time driving the scooter alone, and her father was deeply concerned for her safety. He attempted to call her multiple times, but her phone was turned off. After a few more minutes of waiting, Lisa's father decided to drive along the route she would have taken, hoping to meet her along the way. He drove slowly, scanning the road for any sign of her, fearing she might have been in an accident. Despite his efforts, there was no sign of Lisa. The man arrived at the cafe where his daughter Lisa worked, but she wasn't there. However, her scooter was parked outside, which initially calmed his nerves. But upon closer inspection, he noticed her scooter keys were still in the ignition and her helmet was hanging from the handle. This discovery raised his concerns, as Lisa would never leave her scooter unattended. Around the same time, Lisa's mother contacted the cafe owner, hoping to get some information about her daughter's whereabouts. The cafe owner claimed to be unaware of Lisa's location and explained that she had spoken to her employees earlier, who said they were closing the cafe. The cafe owner then drove to the cafe and met up with Lisa's father. Together, they began searching the cafe and its surroundings. The cafe owner also enlisted the help of 4 friends who lived nearby. As the search continued, Lisa's mother and older sister checked the bus schedule thinking it was possible that Lisa might have taken the bus instead of her scooter. They drove to the bus stop in their town, but unfortunately, Lisa was not on the bus. Despite their efforts, Lisa's family was still unable to find her, and their concerns continued to grow. Lisa's relatives quickly contacted the police after realizing she was missing. It was nearly 1 p.m. Police quickly conducted an extensive search. A crucial discovery was Lisa's scooter, which was left in the parking lot with the keys still in it, leading the police to suspect she might have been abducted. Abductions are extremely rare in Sweden, particularly in Lisa's rural hometown, so the police responded swiftly by deploying multiple search teams with dogs and having officers canvass every nearby house. As news of Lisa's disappearance spread, her classmates and friends took to social media to raise awareness and potentially gather witness accounts. Despite the overnight search, no progress was made. On Monday morning, the police publicly announced Lisa's disappearance and urged anyone with information to come forward. Around the same time, a man working at a barn across from the cafe found a motorcycle glove on the floor and reported it to the police. Detectives re-examined a barn previously inspected on the evening of Lisa's disappearance and discovered a glove. They presented the glove to Lisa's parents, who identified it as their daughter's, providing further evidence for the abduction theory. Police have stepped up the search by sending additional personnel and equipment to assist. By then, Lisa's disappearance had made national headlines, drawing hundreds of volunteers to the search. On Tuesday, the police received multiple leads. A group of volunteers searched a dirt road near the cafe, finding a phone case, receipt, ticket, and broken smartphone screen. After discovering these items, investigators confirmed that they all belonged to Lisa, so they concentrated the search in that area. Further investigation yielded additional parts of the broken smartphone, Lisa's ID, and more receipts. These items were all scattered along the same dirt road, increasing the police's certainty that Lisa was indeed a victim of abduction. The search for Lisa quickly gained a large amount of attention and support, with the number of people involved growing significantly each day. This case became the main news story in Sweden. Hundreds of volunteers from across the country flocked to participate in the search. A group of local volunteers specializing in finding missing people also participated in the search for Lisa. This made Lisa's search operation the largest in Sweden's modern history, with over 1,000 people involved. The police received numerous calls with potential leads. A woman reported a suspicious incident while she was jogging. The day before Lisa went missing, a man standing next to his car stopped her on the road and asked for directions to an unfamiliar city in English. When she tried to help him using Google Maps, the man asked her to get into his car to show the route on his navigator. The woman found this request suspicious and refused, continuing her jog instead. The woman shared a crucial detail with the police. She believed she had seen the man before, among the workers repairing a barn across the road from the cafe where Lisa was last seen. On the day Lisa went missing, her co-workers noticed something unusual. A witness saw two men standing across the road from the cafe, stared at the shop. Although the witness didn't think much of it at the time, but she shared this detail with the police after Lisa's disappearance. The following morning, Lisa's father and some friends searched the dirt road where her belongings were found. As they went further, they found Lisa's driver's license and house keys. It seemed that Lisa's abductor was throwing her belongings out of a vehicle. Despite all efforts, police and volunteers found no other clues in the area. That evening, a friend of Lisa's father was driving home from the search when he noticed that the police tape had been removed from the barn Lisa's glove was found. He decided to re-examine the barn for clues. The friend retrieved a flashlight from his car as it was getting dark and searched the barn for several minutes. He soon spotted something shiny on the floor, which turned out to be a woman's earring, along with an identical earring nearby. The man reported his discovery to the police, who then showed the earrings to Lisa's parents. After confirming that the earrings belonged to their daughter, the police conducted a more thorough search of the storehouse. Initially, the detective explained that the primary focus on the first day of the search was finding Lisa herself. As a result, the barn was not thoroughly inspected, and small items like earrings may have been overlooked. This time, however, numerous forensic experts and search dogs were brought in to aid in the investigation. During the more extensive search, the police found a piece of evidence behind one of the walls that initially seemed unrelated to the case: human feces. Forensic experts, however, proposed an intriguing theory. According to them, in the aftermath of committing severe crimes, the perpetrator's body often releases a significant amount of adrenaline, sometimes leading to a sudden and uncontrollable urge to defecate. It's not uncommon for perpetrators to lose control of their bodily functions due to adrenaline during a crime. Given that Lisa's glove and earrings were discovered in the storehouse, investigators suspected that if she was abducted, the perpetrator might have taken her to the storehouse. They considered the possibility that the perpetrator, under the influence of adrenaline, might have relieved themselves and left behind feces. These feces were subsequently sent for DNA analysis. On Friday, the search area was expanded and volunteers searched a farm approximately 2 miles from the cafe. The farm consisted of several large buildings with many employees, and the search team decided to inspect each one. Shortly after their arrival, 2 men appeared, communicating only in English as they didn't speak Swedish. One of them claimed that the police had already searched the farm, but the search team leader was skeptical. He believed he would have been informed if the police had indeed visited the farm, so he decided to proceed with the search. The 2 men observed the volunteers for a while before leaving. About an hour later, the search team discovered a pile of branches behind the cow sheet. Upon closer inspection, they found a motorcycle helmet, jacket, and headphones hidden underneath. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and confirmed that the items found were indeed Lisa's. To gather more evidence, forensic experts were dispatched to the farm for a thorough investigation. Detectives also investigated the story about 2 suspicious men who attempted to deter volunteers from searching the farm. During their inquiry, the police revisited a report from a woman who encountered an English-speaking man while jogging. The police had a potential suspect in mind. In the early stages of the search, they had visited nearby houses, includes a house where 2 Lithuanian brothers live with their wives. What caught the police's attention was that these 3 individuals did not speak Swedish and communicated in English, making them the only people in the area who did not speak the local language. Additionally, the police had other indirect reasons to suspect them. The brothers worked at a barn near the cafe and the farm where Lisa's helmet was found, indicating they were familiar with these locations. Furthermore, the dirt road where Lisa's belongings were discovered led directly to their house. The police decided to question the 3 individuals since they were the prime suspects. Meanwhile, forensic experts and volunteers arrived at the farm to continue their inspection. Their attention was drawn to an old neglected trailer surrounded by tall grass, which seemed abandoned for years. However, the flattened grass near the door suggested recent activity. Trapped grass under the door also indicated it had been opened recently. Upon opening the door, the forensic experts were met with a strong smell of decay. Inside, they found a changing room with multiple clothing lockers. All are locked except one. This led them to suspect that Lisa's body might be inside one of the locked lockers. However, they eventually found Lisa's body in an unlocked closet, hidden behind a pile of old clothes and rags. Despite the small space, the perpetrator managed to fit Lisa inside. A rope was around her neck, and her head was covered with a large amount of tape. Her pants were pulled down, and her shirt was pulled up. Medical experts concluded that Lisa's cause of death was strangulation, with no evidence of sexual assault. Her clothing was sent to the lab for further examination. As news of her body's discovery spread rapidly across the country, the case had already been making headlines in Sweden. The brutality of Lisa's murder shocked the entire nation, as such crimes were extremely rare in Sweden. A strange and disturbing discovery was made on YouTube the same day her body was discovered. A video titled 13 featuring a countdown timer had been posted 13 days before the murder. What makes this video scarier is that it was uploaded to a channel called Lisa Home. News of the video spread quickly through the media, leaving many people stunned by the series of coincidences. Some speculated that the murder had been predicted, but it was later revealed that the channel name and video title had been changed after Lisa's body was discovered, explaining the eerie coincidence. This has raised concerns that this could be a joke or an attempt to create another conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, the police worked day and night tirelessly to catch Lisa's murderer and solve the case as quickly as possible. At the time of the discovery, investigators had already questioned 2 brothers and a woman, all of whom denied any involvement in the murder. The 3 individuals claimed to have been at home at the time of the abduction, providing alibis for one another. According to their accounts, the older brother, Narages, was asleep in his room while his wife was preparing dinner and the younger brother was using the computer. Narages also stated that around 8 p.m., he woke up and went to a gas station to buy pizza and cigarettes. The police were skeptical of their alibis, as it was possible that the 3 were covering for each other. DNA samples were collected, but initially, no evidence directly linked any of them to the murder. However, this was short-lived. Forensic experts were working diligently in the storehouse and on the farm, utilizing all available resources, and soon their efforts paid off. In the storehouse, a small office-like room was discovered with a large window overlooking the cafe. Upon investigation, experts found 15 semen stains on the walls and floor near the window, suggesting someone had been standing there, watching the cafe employees, including Lisa, and engaging in self-gratification. The semen samples were sent to the lab for analysis, and DNA profiles were quickly extracted. All 15 samples matched the DNA of 35-year-old Narages. Additionally, the feces found in the storehouse also belonged to him. In the adjacent room, previously used for storing cow's milk, forensic experts noticed a pipe about 2 feet above the floor with a thick layer of dust, except for a small strip. The size of this strip matched the rope used to strangle Lisa. Blood was also found on the pipe, and DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Narages. On the floor beneath the pipe, a piece of the same rope was discovered. Experts analyzed it and found 2 DNA profiles, Lisa's and Narages's. This discovery was an important clue for the police. This indicates that the rope used to kill Lisa was related to Narages. A crucial piece of evidence was discovered in the room where Lisa's body was found, a hair belonging to her. Further investigation revealed DNA traces from Narages on Lisa's jacket, leading the police to believe she was killed in that location. Police have been studying the evidence and using it to piece together what might have happened. Narages had been watching the cafe for some time and waited for an opportunity to strike. When Lisa was alone in the parking lot, he approached her, possibly asking for directions or using another tactic to gain her trust. He may have then asked her to get into his car to enter the route into the GPS system. Given Lisa's kind nature and willingness to help others, it's likely she agreed to help him. Once she was in the car, Narages taped her mouth shut and drove her to the storehouse. There, he bound her with a rope. According to medical experts, the killer's adrenaline rush at the scene may have caused him to lose control of his bodily functions, resulting in defecation on the floor. After Lisa's death, the perpetrator placed her body in the car and drove to the farm, discarding her belongings along the way. He then hid her body in the trailer locker, covering it with old clothes. The entire ordeal, from abduction to hiding the body, took the perpetrator less than an hour. Narajus maintains his innocence despite mounting evidence against him. His wife and younger brother were released due to lack of evidence and promptly returned to their home country, Lithuania. The trial preparations were intense, with Narajus claiming his DNA was found at the crime scene because he had worked in the storehouse for a long time. He also provided an alibi which was corroborated by his wife and brother, although their credibility was questionable. This defense may work in court, but the finding of Narajus' DNA on Lisa's clothing suggests direct contact on the day of the murder. Furthermore, a witness reported seeing Narajus' car near the cafe around the time of Lisa's abduction, contradicting his alibi. The car was seen driving back and forth between the cafe and the farm, while Narajus claimed to have been sleeping at home, according to his brother and wife. Months after Lisa's body was discovered, experts continued to analyze the evidence using advanced equipment. They found Narajus' DNA on nearly all of Lisa's clothing, including her underwear. Given the high-profile nature of the case, investigators sought additional clues to solidify the evidence against Narajus. As part of their investigation, they traveled to Lithuania to re-question Narajus' wife and brother. Narajus' wife maintained her initial alibi, claiming he was at home between 6 o'clock and 8 p.m. However, when detectives spoke with Narajus' younger brother, they finally obtained the information they needed. After being presented with the evidence against Narajus and the details of the crime, the younger brother revealed that Narajus was not at home that evening. According to the younger brother, Narajus returned around 7:30 p.m., covered in dirt, and immediately washed his clothes. When the police began questioning the residents and approached their house, Narajus instructed his brother to tell police he was home at the time of the crime. Narajus later explained that he was afraid of being wrongly accused due to his immigrant status and lack of alibi during the abduction. The younger brother initially believed Narajus innocent, but after learning about the evidence, he realized this wasn't true. A month after murder, a large crowd attended Lisa's funeral, far exceeding the church's capacity of 130 people. To accommodate the mourners, organizers set up benches and large screens outside, allowing everyone to watch the ceremony. For months later, the trial began. Narajus' lawyer argued that his client's DNA on Lisa's clothing could be explained by his work in the storehouse. However, they countered that this explanation didn't hold up, especially regarding Lisa's underwear. The only plausible way Narajus' DNA could have ended up on her underwear was through direct contact. The lawyer failed to provide any evidence supporting Narajus' innocence. At one point, lawyers suggested an alternative theory that Narajus' younger brother was the real killer. The lawyer failed to address the possibility of DNA manipulation during the trial, which lasted a month and resulted in Narajus being found guilty of murder. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security Swedish prison, which offered relatively comfortable living conditions. Narajus' lawyer attempted to appeal the verdict but was unsuccessful. In 2017, Narajus made a surprising decision when he requested to be deported to a prison in Lithuania. Despite Lithuanian prisons being notoriously worse than Swedish ones, the court granted his request, probably because it would result in substantial cost savings for Swedish taxpayers. It did not take long to understand the reason behind Narajus' decision. He appealed to the Lithuanian court and successfully had his sentence reduced from life to 15 years. However, this victory was short-lived as the court later overturned the decision, reinstating his life sentence. Unfortunately for Narajus, he was now stuck in a Lithuanian prison, with no chance of returning to the more comfortable Swedish prison. In August 2022, 5 years after his initial imprisonment, Narajus has been transferred to another prison in Lithuania, where he encountered another life-threatening situation. During a block transfer, an inmate attacked Narajus with a shank, causing severe injuries that ultimately led to his death on the way to the hospital. Regarding Narajus, the question of her involvement in the crime remains unclear. Although police believe it is highly unlikely that she was directly involved in the abduction or murder, they do not rule out the possibility that she may have been aware of her husband's actions and provided a false alibi to help him. If she had been directly involved, experts would have likely found her DNA on Lisa's clothing or belongings. Additionally, Narajus' younger brother has raised suspicions. Cafe employees reported seeing two men, likely Narajus and his younger brother, standing near the barn and watching the employees. However, the younger brother's DNA was not found in the barn or on Lisa's clothing, making his involvement in the murder unlikely. It is possible that the brothers were indeed observing the employees and discussing inappropriate topics, but only Narajus ultimately committed the crime.